more information on our top stories, do visit our website, channelstv.com. YouTube.com/channelsweb has videos of our shows. The federal government is intensifying its fight against corruption as the president pushes for more effective measures to tackle graft. This next report examines the fight so far.
If we are to make any headway, is to bring in laws, regulations, and policies that encourage transparent financial transactions, as well as implementing measures that will mitigate the incentives that facilitate illegal outflows from the continent.
Since coming into power in 2015, President Muhammadu Buhari has used every opportunity to reinforce his administration's stance against corruption. However, in the last 4 years, opinions seem divided on how the campaign against corruption has fared. The 2018 Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, a global indicator of public sector corruption, places Nigeria as the 144th most corrupt country in the world out of 180 countries assessed. Concerned about this negative image, President Buhari's administration, in collaboration with the anti-graft agencies, has been pushing the limits. In addition, the EFCC has led efforts in trying to get the buy-in of Nigerians in the anti-corruption campaign.
The fight against corruption has come to stay.
President Muhammadu Buhari has now asked the National Assembly to fast-track the passage of the Special Crimes Court Bill into law during the Anti-Corruption Summit organized by the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC. Nigerians will be watching closely to see how this latest move to establish the Special Crimes Court will contribute in tackling corruption in the country.
Now let's examine the issue further. And joining me live from Abuja is the chairman of the Anti-Corruption Network, Mr. Olanrewaju Suraj. Thanks a lot for joining us on the news at 10 as we look at this. Now, with all the strategies put in place to tackle corruption, you're welcome. With all those strategies put in place, obviously the problem still persists. What difference do you see this special crimes court making when the bill eventually passes?
Well, I think before we get to the court, we must actually look at the critical ingredients that are revolving around both the issues that we want to address, the other ingredients that would make easy for the courts to function effectively, and also the key issues about also the political will on the part of the political leadership. One key statement said by the president earlier today was the fact that there must be the need to mitigate the facilitation of the illicit financial flow, and not just illicit financial flow, but actually corruption. And I would give you a very lucid example. If we're talking about the issue of the constituency project, where the president said about 1 trillion naira has gone down in the constituency project without having anything on ground to show for it. To actually mitigate that would be that the executive, that is headed by the president, must actually stop the flow of that fund to the constituency project in the National Assembly. There's nowhere in the world where the legislature are also responsible for executing projects. So that is an aberration, that is unconstitutional. So that is the first mitigation that is expected of the executive. So you don't create an enabling environment for corruption and then you want to go to court. All you will end up having is a court that will be so much inundated with cases, and then you would have the protraction of even these cases, which will lead to where we're actually running away from. Do we also have the courts here? So I see the attempt by the judiciary, which informed the creation of the courtroom code, which is the court, the Committee for the Monitoring of the Economic and Financial Crimes and Corruption Trial in the court, with designated courts already across the country. This was also to facilitate the speedy dispensation of cases that are connected with economic crimes and also corruption. But the challenge has been that you've got the courts, But what about the enabling environment for the courts to actually function effectively? The motivation of the judges, the documentation of the records, the even ambience and environment of the courts, the activities of the prosecution, and also the activity of the lawyers, and in this case, the defense counsel. These are critical issues that must be concerned, that must be of concern to everybody, and also not just now the government, but
Okay,
other stakeholders
yes,
in the courts.
Yes, that's good. But let's look at something the president mentioned today, even as he was talking about this bill, saying that when assets recovery cases get to court, you know, criminally minded officers or officials are very quick to disown the properties, and then it ends up in forfeiture. That's what you find. Do you think that these special courts will be able to avoid that same loophole where, you know, an officer says, okay, it's not mine, and then it's forfeited, and that's the end of it very quickly now?
Oh, okay, yeah. So because I hope that shouldn't really be a problem. That should be an achievement, and that we can also give to the EFCC. I think the EFCC has actually succeeded in tracking some of these assets such that quite a number of the owners, and many of them usually are civil servants who lack the capacity or means to justify the ownership of those assets, who don't have evidence to show for them. And they are usually built in the names of even underage children, in the names of their domestic staff, and they can't, in all honesty, come to court to justify ownership or even defend it or even show evidence that of that ownership. So they usually easily abandon it. So for those ones that are abandoned, it saves the country, it saves the country money for prosecution, because prosecution is not just also that cheap, and it's also saved the time of the court. So you can have interim forfeiture and final forfeiture within a reasonable time, and that must actually happen a lot under the current dispensation.
All right, Chairman of the Anti-Corruption Network, Mr. Olanrewaju Suraj, thanks for joining us on the News at 10 tonight.
Always my pleasure.
Well, we can now bring you a bit more about that issue we reported earlier, the Katsina High Court adjourning the trial of Governor Ibrahim Shima and 3 others to December the 11th and the 12th. Let's just listen in to see what transpired.
No, we have been on trial within trial to determine the voluntariness of a statement made by the 4th defendant in this case. And today the court ruled that the statement was not voluntarily made based on the objection we raised initially. So the statement has been marked rejected and the matter adjourned for continuation of hearing.
The ruling was just with respect to the statement of the admissibility or otherwise of the statement of the 4th accused person. That was just the decision of the court. The court rejected the statement made by the 4th accused person, which is not detrimental at all to our case.
All right, let's cross over to Abuja again. Here's Ibrahim Adra. Ibrahim?
Hi, good to see you. And let's go back to the court now. The Court of Appeal in Abuja has affirmed the election of Governor Emeka Ihedioha of Imo State. Petitions filed against Governor Ihedioha by 3 political parties, Action Alliance, that's AA, All Progressives Congress, APC, and the All Progressives Grand Alliance, ABGA, and their governorship candidates were dismissed by the court for lacking in merit. And while the judgment of the Action Alliance and the All Progressive Grand Alliance were unanimous judgments of the appeal court panel, of the All Progressive Congress, on the other hand, was dismissed in a 4-1 split judgment. Now, in what may have been perceived as an affront to the judiciary, the Department of State Services is insisting that the only one of the persons who stood as sureties for detained convener of #Revolution Now, Mr. Moele Sowore, can secure his release from custody. The spokesman of the service, Mr. Peter Funaya, told a news conference in Abuja that the appropriate persons have not come for Sowore's release. He says that those who came are protesters contrary to administrative procedure that must be followed for him to be released. Mr. Afunaya, who also claims that personnel of the service are being threatened, although as the service holds human rights in high regard. Meanwhile, human rights lawyer Mr. Femi Falana has reacted to the DSS spokesman's claim that only one of the persons standing as sureties for Mr. Sowore and his co-defendant Olawale Bakari can secure their release. Describing the press conference as diversionary, Mr. Falana explained that he had visited the DSS office in Abuja today and informed his clients that the court had ordered their release from custody upon verification of their sureties. I also describe as disgraceful the DSS claim that Sowore could be knocked down by a moving vehicle if released from custody, adding that he had personally offered to drive him out of the services office but was turned down. The senior advocate also accused the DSS of playing to the gallery and advised the service to restrain its spokesman from further exposing the country to ridicule in its bid to justify the illegal detention of Sowore and Bakari.